Why has Amazon suddenly backflipped on letting Aussies order from overseas?
And is Sony's exit from E3 the death knell for the gaming expo?
Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm not joined this week to go behind the headlines in search of the big picture by Adam Turner, because he's, and I quote, sitting on a beach making 20%. Instead, he's told me to break the glass on the emergency vertical hold co-host glass. I really hope you remember to put air holes in that thing. It was a hell of a mess last time. Stand back! And so I'm joined, only lightly dusted in glass shards, by Leigh Stark from picker.com.au. Leigh, welcome to the comfy co-host.
It's great to be back. Is the glass supposed to be underneath me?
Look, just don't try and breathe any of it in.
Cool.
This week, we're looking behind Amazon's decision to suddenly let Aussies shop at any Amazon store globally, as well as Sony's decision to pull out of E3. But first, over to the Vertical Hold news desk. Leigh, what's new in tech news?
Steam finally understands what an Australian dollar is. Well, sort of anyway. The Valve-owned US games distribution network had for years charged in US dollars, despite charging Australians quite different prices from those found in the USA. But this week, it switched over to providing Australians pricing in the good old Aussie dollars. The changeover didn't go smoothly, however, with some games vanishing from the service entirely due to their publishers forgetting to set Aussie pricing. Other games, rather predictably, saw the price hikes even ahead of the Steam autumn sale.
NBN Co's first quarter 2019 results are in, and the news is mixed. On the plus side, revenue was up to $620 million, and activations on the network, and that's people actually going live with an NBN service, were up 48%. However, average revenue per user remains steady at $44, where NBN Co has previously indicated it needs to hit targets of around $52 to break even. Meanwhile, a parliamentary committee is recommending that NBN Co look further into Layer 3 technologies for its satellite and fixed wireless services to deliver more consistent speeds and better data quotas to Australia's most remote broadband users.
Amazon has added Skype integration to its Alexa assistant, so it's now possible to link the two services and call out from Skype via an Alexa-enabled speaker such as the Sonos One or any of Amazon's own Echo speakers. The screen-enabled Echo Show and Echo Spot can also make video calls, but naturally, you can only make an audio call from a standalone speaker.
Telstra hit a landmark this week, completing the first live 5G connection using a commercial 5G chipset on its testbed Gold Coast 5G network. Of note, Telstra used what it's calling a form factor device, which is basically just fancy telco speak for something about the size of a phone. That's quite the step forward. When Vertical Hold's Adam Turner attended Telstra's 5G network trials earlier this year, the example device was the size of a ute. You'll still be waiting a while for actual 5G devices, although maybe not that long, with rumours this week suggesting that Samsung's Galaxy S10, due out next year, may have a 5G-enabled variant.
So Alex, are you happy about Steam finally being in Australian dollary-doos?
Look, as much as I love the Australian dollary-do in all of its plasticky goodness, it's a lot better than those cocaine-soaked American dollars they used to charge us in. It's not, a lot easier to tell apart. It's not exactly gone smoothly, and I'm not entirely sure that there's been a net end benefit to Australian gamers on that particular service. I mean, I think Valve's in a really interesting position here because it's previously been slapped down for kind of misrepresenting the way Australian consumer law is meant to work around gaming refunds. It's now sort of trying to do the right thing and say, hey, look, when we say dollar, we mean Australian dollar. You don't have to think, well, is this US dollars and how much is it going to cost me? And that's kind of convenient. But at the same time, it's not the same PC gaming market that it was when Valve first launched it.
I think what interests me, like it's been a while since I've actually had to log onto Steam and let alone had the time to play a game. But what interests me about it is like back in the day when you were charged American dollars, often the prices of a lot of Steam games were actually so good that being charged even the conversion fee seemed like nothing because at least you knew you weren't being charged the Australian tax just for being an Australian. I guess I remember when Steam started to launch games like specific inside the Australian market, and the prices suddenly start to go up again. That's what worries me about this, adoption of the Australian dollar, is if we're going to start to see things again with the Australian tax.
Yeah, I guess the good news there is, of course, that Steam's got a lot of competitors in this space. I mean, you've got both the publisher-owned direct things via the likes of EA and Ubisoft. You've got other online game competitors for digital delivery. And that whole digital delivery market is it's so much of the gaming space now, but especially in PC land. I mean, you can buy boxed PC games these days if you're so amazingly keen, but you basically better be buying them for the special figurine or mug that sometimes comes with those special editions, because otherwise you'll open the case and there'll be a download code in there anyway. Now, admittedly, an awful lot of the time that's a Steam code, but still there is competition in that space, and most PC gamers tend to be savvy enough to shop around and work out, right, where's the best deal that I can get for this? Having that in Australian dollars, I guess, makes it a little easier for them to compare like for like.
And now hopefully it gives Valve enough time to actually get that Half-Life 3 or Portal 3 thing done. I mean, for crying out loud, how long has it been? We're at the 20-year mark for Half-Life. Maybe they can spend some time and actually work on a game.
So, Leigh, you're a man with a young daughter, and everyone with young kids ends up buying lots and lots and lots of things. And in this day and age, the place where you buy lots and lots and lots of things is Amazon, or at least Amazon would like to think that. But they've made a big, big change because they've backflipped on their whole Australians can't shop anywhere but Amazon Australia this week. Does that excite you?
If I had money, it probably would. I don't know.
Oh, that's right. You're a journalist.
I'm a parent. I'm in the negative now. Look, you're a new parent. No, I don't know. I like the idea that it's been opened up beyond Amazon Australia, because as neat as the idea of Amazon Australia was, it didn't quite, I guess, pan out the way most of us expected. It wasn't the full Amazon marketplace that we wanted. It was a whole bunch of different companies joining Amazon and kind of offering more of the same, but in a nicer Amazon-like interface, I guess. So I like the idea that now I do a lot of book shopping on Amazon, and that's always been kind of available, but you do hit sometimes the books that you can only get from Amazon UK or you can only get from Amazon US. And I say same thing with vinyl. Vinyl's a great example of that. So I like the idea that I can now get it through there, but there are limitations to what I can get. This isn't the full Amazon, is it?
No, it's not. There is a big caveat here, and it's basically that Amazon's said, having previously said, oh no, look, the online GST, it's too hard for us to do, we'll have a little walled garden for Australians to live in. They've now gone, well, actually, no, we can do that. But only for items fulfilled by Amazon itself in the country you're ordering from. So they've more or less got to be Prime suitable is probably the easiest way to think of it. They've got to go through an Amazon warehouse, and that means anyone listing on the Amazon marketplace in the US or the UK or any of its other global markets, you won't be able to order from them. But if it's fulfilled by Amazon, you will, where previously they'd set up this kind of slightly janky global store which had a really small selection of things. It opens up a fair bit of price competition, but not all.
So does it mean you can effectively, because I'm actually genuinely interested in this, does it mean you can actually order some of those random Amazon Alexa-enabled Echo devices that weren't actually launched here? You know, like the Echo-enabled clock or the really oddly placed Echo-enabled microwave?
That's a really good question. I have not tried that as yet, and actually I wouldn't generally advise people to do that because, I mean, I think you'd kick over the level where they charge you for the shipping.
The clock should be fine. I mean, that's not going to be that shouldn't be dramatically heavy. The microwave would be bad for several reasons, weight being one of them, but also voltage possibly being another.
Voltage was what I was going to get to, that it really would burn your house down quite quickly. I mean, it'd scream nicely while it was doing it, but I very much doubt that Amazon has built that microwave to be 110 to 240
hey, Alexa,
volt capable. And if it has, then it's
hey,
a
Alexa,
happy accident.
How quickly will this burn down my house?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the timing of this probably isn't coincidental. Call me cynical, but we've got Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and whilst those are terribly US-centric terms, these are sales that have picked up a lot of interest here in Australia. Australians love a bargain. And Amazon announcing this just before Black Friday is a big, please come and shop at Amazon. Yeah, we'll let you look at lots and lots of other things. Don't look elsewhere kind of play. Am I being too cynical in that
I think you're pretty much spot on, and we've certainly seen a lot of stuff coming in from pretty much every retailer. I'd say that the majority of news this week has been, please write about our Black Friday sales, our Cyber Monday sales, even though, as you said, the origins of these are Thanksgiving, which Australians don't have, but again, it's kind of spread around the world, so let's just call it that we have it. But yeah, we're seeing so much of this that it makes a lot of sense for Amazon to go, well, even if the sales aren't remarkably fantastic, and if you look around, some of the sales are not remarkably fantastic for Black Friday in Australia, it makes sense for Amazon to say, well, you've seen it on the Australian website, now check out the rest of the world.
You've also got to be a little bit careful with some of the other things that you order that are suddenly available. I do a lot of work with mobiles, obviously, and I discovered today that a bunch of phones that Amazon previously wasn't selling because the usual direct importers into Australia didn't have them are being offered through US sellers. They're being fulfilled by Amazon US, so they're available. But, of course, if you buy those, they're not necessarily going to work well, if at all, on Australian networks. And your ability to actually get a refund on those is also going to be similarly, it's going to be convoluted, shall we put it. You should have rights. Enforcing those rights on the internet
it's a really valid point. It's not just about 3G, 4G communications. You also have to think about NFC. If you're buying a device ahead of time and you're thinking, well, I'm going to get this great flagship device at a cheaper price, well, some of those great features like the mobile connection, like the security for you to pay things with, may not work in this country because they're not set up for it.
And you may even just miss out on features you're expecting. One of the weird little factoids that always bubbles around in my head is that for the longest time, Sony phones sold in the US didn't have a fingerprint sensor. They never said why. They just didn't have them in that market. So it's well worth opening up the US marketplace does give Australians a lot more choice, and you can definitely now compare those people who are selling through Amazon Australia versus the US, and obviously above a certain price point, and especially if you have Prime, your shipping might become negligible. But it's worth making sure you're comparing like with like, that you are getting what you expect, because if it is coming from the States, it's a lot harder to deal with, and especially if it's not exactly directly coming through Amazon. Amazon has a middling kind of rep for how it deals with when the wrong thing gets sent. Sometimes it does the right thing very quickly and tries to please customers. Other times it doesn't. And at any time of the year, it's apparently horrible to work in an Amazon warehouse, as Doctor Who parodied rather nicely this week. But you shouldn't really assume, a refund will be easy if something goes wrong. Yep.
The one question I have about what you're saying, and everything is completely valid on everything you're saying there, you and I are in complete agreement, but I always knew we would be because we work the same area, and that makes a lot of sense. But you have phones in America that, they seem like they're cheaper because the cost that they come up with is the upfront cost before the AT&T deal or the Verizon deal or whatever deal that you're on, the Sprint deal, whatever. So, you might see a Galaxy S8 or an S9 for $200, and that seems like an absolute bargain. But I'm rather curious how that actually works. If you order from that deal, the people ordering in Australia, for instance, might not be aware there's a telco deal attached to that.
Yeah, this is the kind of classic iPhone pricing trap that people used to fall into, where they thought that iPhones in the States were a lot cheaper. What I've seen of phones on Amazon, though, and obviously there are thousands of phones, so this is entirely kind of anecdotal and personal research driven, though, the vast majority of phones sold there are sold unlocked. So they're sold contract-free. But it is worth keeping in mind, and they should list that in the fine print. Whether or not they do, I guess you've kind of got to apply that, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is pricing metric. If someone's selling a very, very cheap, very good phone on Amazon, I'd give it serious thought before you invested, because if it turns up and it is tied to one of those contracts, then the chances are it's also locked to those networks, and even getting it unlocked could be a very convoluted process of activating a contract, cancelling a contract, paying contract cancellation fees, or trying to hack the bootloader. And none of these are things that you want to do when you've got a shiny.
And alternatively, if you're worried about it, just email the seller and ask.
Yeah, that's a perfectly valid strategy. Of course, again, the seller just wants to sell. They might not, of course, be aware that suddenly they're selling to Australia either. You do get that. You do get that issue more with things on eBay. I find where they say, does not ship to anywhere but the US or whatever, because they make it a lot clearer to their sellers where they're shipping to, even if Amazon's fulfilling it. So you may well kind of query them and say, "Hey, will this work on Australian networks?" And Jim Bob in Arkansas will go, "Well, gee, I don't know." So, Leigh, it's a funny time of year to be talking about E3, the big electronic gaming expo, but Sony's made some E3 headlines recently, and not in a way that E3 is going to like.
Yeah.
What's the story?
Interestingly, everyone has always looked to May for the Electronic Entertainment Expo. I think when I was a kid, I stared at the Electronic Entertainment magazines that I think were originally behind them, and just went, "Oh God, I wish I could go there," because it was the big show. It's the big place to be. It was a place to see back then Nintendo and Sega, and these days it's the place to see Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony, except for that come next year it won't be the place to see Sony at all, because Sony is getting out. It's leaving the E3. It's leaving the Electronic Entertainment Expo, and I don't think it's really said why.
Yeah, it's an unusual. Well, it's not entirely an unusual step. I think I can see the strategy behind it. And there's a rumor attached to this, which we'll get to in a moment. But I think in a larger strategic sense, what it's looking for is what I could kind of call the Apple effect. So Apple, for example, never appears at Mobile World Congress or IFA or CES or any of these big trade shows because it wants the headlines to itself. It wants to be able to control its messaging. And I think there's a strong element of this in what Sony's decided to do. And that's especially true because part of what's been kind of mooted and kicked around is that they're potentially looking at launching a PlayStation 4 successor sometime in the next 12 months, maybe a little longer. And E3, of course, is traditionally where you do those big announcements. But we've seen some different strategizing around that. E3 was not where Nintendo announced the Switch, for example. It was known about before then. So I think there's some elements just of messaging control there. But, I mean, you mentioned them being, the big thing that everyone wanted to go to. And I'm also just left wondering, Sony's not going to be there. Nintendo does their own kind of direct stuff, although a lot of other publishers will show off Nintendo-specific games, especially with how much momentum the Switch has picked up. But I wonder how much relevance E3 kind of has in the modern era where headlines are everything and digital distribution.
Yeah, I mean, I look at companies like Devolver, which seem to have a game release or a game announcement every 10 minutes. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's some great games there. But it's not like video games have a different feeling toward the hardware. You have to see hardware announcement firsthand. It helps to see video game announcement firsthand so you can play with it, you can get your feelings known. But it's different from a hardware announcement. And it is kind of like, as you said, with the Apple thing. I mean, Samsung has been doing the same sort of thing lately. It sometimes announces phones at Mobile World Congress, but more frequently it has been announcing them separate. And it's been avoiding IFA for the most part. At random times, year in, year out, it will change, but we're seeing that fairly regularly, that major companies, as you said, they control the message, and it also, more than anything else, allows that message to be unique, because one of the downsides of a massive show like E3 or even CES is that you get lost. Your competitor can one-up you, to use the video game terminology. They can definitely one-up you and take away some of that steam. Again, I'm with the puns today. They can take away some of that. It's just like an NBA Jam right now. But yeah, they can one up you and take away your steam without you even really realizing it. And I don't know when the next Xbox is going to be announced, but I presume there's going to be another major Xbox in the next year or two as well. It doesn't take much to remove some of that, I guess, impetus that Sony would definitely need. So it doesn't really shock me that they would be leaving, but it's kind of sad because E3 has been that place to be for video games for such a long time. That said, we have things like PAX, we have TGS in Tokyo. I mean, there are a lot of gaming shows now that make an impact, and it's not just E3.
Yeah, and I guess and PAX is a good example of this, I guess we're also seeing an evolution of that model. Because the issue for E3 is, these days, if you're interested in what's going on at E3, post the big keynotes, you'll see a bunch of trailers. And if I'm sitting at my desk in Sydney, I can probably watch it a bit cleaner and a bit clearer than someone sitting in the audience for it. Because I can just, I can sit there, I can pause, I can rewind, I can do what I like with that trailer. They're rushing around a show floor, and it's very busy, and I know tons of journalists who've done this. And I know plenty of them who said, look, I don't actually bother going to all the keynotes because I can even do better sitting in my hotel room watching the keynote online. And pretty much everyone can do that now. I think also, though, one of the big reasons to do a big trade show is it's not just about us as the journalists. It's not just about that media impact. It's about all the meetings and all the retail stuff that goes on. But in gaming, that is absolutely shifting. We talked about this a little bit earlier with Steam. That's absolutely shifting towards digital. You look at the Switch release catalog. Yes, you can buy physical Switch cartridges, but for a tiny fraction of the total available library. Like there's the hundreds of Switch games which are digital only. It's a lot more convenient, and I know a lot of people who just go, no, my Switch library is just digital. I can't be fanged with putting cartridges in and out of a Switch. Sony and Microsoft obviously have huge plays in this space through their online gaming setups and through Microsoft Game Pass and things like that. As such, that pitch towards, traditionally what would have been an EB Games or similar, that's also less important. And we see those stores changing as they go into selling, more gaming accoutrements and clothing and
merch,
vinyls and
they're selling
other
merch.
related items.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say as we were getting to that. I don't know if that's necessarily the death of E3, but it's certainly getting close to it again. And I remember at one point a few years ago, this would have been 7 or 8 years ago, E3 kind of had that feeling again where originally it was open to the public, but then they started closing it up again, and it was just all about the journos. And I don't know what the trend is like now. I know E3 goes through these shifts somewhat every decade or so. But I guess my point is, because I have one somewhere in here, is that is the end of E3 or is the gradual decline of E3 indicative of also the gaming shop in a nutshell? I mean, as you said, we're seeing gaming shops turn into merch shops because that's kind of where that market has shifted. As E3 starts to not fall apart, but certainly wind down, will it also mean the death of the game shop?
There is part of me that hopes not, because there are some advantages to that model. But clearly, we are shifting to digital, and that has obviously some benefits in terms of immediacy and availability of copies, for example. You essentially never run out of digital copies as long as you have digital keys. But at the same time, you lose some benefits of physical ownership. It essentially demolishes the secondhand market and that trade-in market that a lot of people have used over the years. Now, some people are no longer fussed about that, and they're fine to kind of view their game ownership as a rental, and especially for those games which are so heavily reliant on an online component, they may as well be, because as soon as the servers go, you can't do anything with the code anyway. So I think it's an evolution of that model. As someone who's very, very keen on kind of retro gaming, I'll be sad to see all game shops go, although I suspect that's the segment that will last the longest. The really crusty old types like myself who still want a physical cartridge and will scour the earth to get
your specialty shops in Tokyo, which you could probably find the next time you go to a Tokyo game show anyway.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Now, as always, we love to get your feedback on the show, so feel free to comment via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks to Leigh for co-hosting the show.
Thank you for letting me out of the cage.
Well, look, the bad news is now I've got to work shoving you back behind the emergency glass.
No, don't do that. Don't do, wait.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. And remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button. And if you've already subscribed, leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening.
Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.
This is why I like you, Leigh. You're an optimist.
Yeah, I waited for Duke Nukem and look what I got.